Hi mga ka-OSH, kumusta po kayo? This is Engineer Ellen from the Occupational Safety and Health Center Regional Extension Unit Number 8. Pursuant to Section 17 of the Republic Act 11058, the Act strengthening the compliance on the occupational safety and health standard and providing penalties thereof, and its implementing rules and regulations, the DOLE Department Order 198 Series of 2018, all employers are mandated to submit to the Department of Labor and Employment the occupational safety and health reports. Now, one of this report is your annual accident illness exposure data report. So, meron tayong tinatawag na prescribed form. Okay, on our previous video, we were able to discuss on the different reports that you're going to submit to DOLE at na-discuss din natin kung saan nyo pwede i-download ang mga forms. So one of the form is your AEDR form, and it is actually called the DOLE/BWC/HSD-IP-6B. So that is for your annual exposure data report. So in that particular form, there is a requirement for you to fill in up or to give the information about the frequency rate and the severity rate on that form. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to walk you through on how to compute for your frequency rate and your severity rate. Okay, so let's proceed and discuss on how to compute for the disabling injuries, illnesses, frequency, and severity rate. Now, pursuant to Rule 1050 of the Occupational Safety and Health Standard, this is the definition of terms that we are going to use. Disabling injury shall mean a work injury which results in death, permanent total disability, permanent partial disability, and temporary total disability. Now, death shall mean fatality resulting from a work injury, regardless of the time intervening between injury and death. So, for example, nagkaroon ng aksidente sa workplace, nagkaroon ng injury si worker. Hindi man si worker namatay doon mismo sa workplace niya, posible namatay si worker doon na sa hospital, still that will be considered as fatality or work-related death. Okay? So, counted po yan sa computation natin as death kung ito ay dulot ng pag-aaksidente ni worker sa workplace. Now, permanent total disability shall mean any injury. Okay, so any injury or sickness other than death which permanently and totally incapacitates an employee from engaging in any gainful occupation or which results in the loss or the complete loss of any of the following in one accident. So A, both eyes, B, one eye and one hand or arm or a leg or a foot, C, any two of the following not in the same limb, hand, arm, foot, and leg. Then D, permanent complete paralysis of two limbs. E, brain injury resulting in incurable imbecility or insanity. So all of these shall be considered as permanent total disability. For permanent partial disability, it shall mean any injury other than death or permanent total disability which results in the loss or loss of use of any member or part of a member of the body, regardless of any pre-existing disability of the injured member or impaired body function. Now, for temporary total disability, it shall mean an injury or illness which does not result in death or permanent total or permanent partial disability, but which results in disability from work for a day or more. So these are the cases wherein there was no partial or permanent disability involved, but of course the worker was not able to go back to his established job. So hindi siya nakabalik sa trabaho niya the following day dulot ng pagkakaroon ng injury dahil na aksidente si worker, or days. So that will be considered as temporary total disability. Now, for the total days lost naman, it shall mean the combined total for all injuries or illnesses. A, all days of disability resulting from temporary total injuries. So yung temporary total disability, sabi natin na hindi man siya nagkaroon ng partial or permanent disability, pero na-absent si worker, hindi siya nakapasok sa trabaho niya or sa established job niya for a day or more. So yan yung ika-count natin in all days of disability. Then B could also be all charges. So ito i-add natin, and or. Okay, so all scheduled charges assigned to fatal, permanent total, and permanent partial injuries or illnesses. Now, for the scheduled charges, as mentioned dito sa letter B natin, scheduled charges shall mean the specific charge in full days assigned to a permanent partial, permanent total, or fatal injury or illness. So, ito dito makikita natin yung mga scheduled charges on Table 6 of the Occupational Safety and Health Standard for the tabulation of the scheduled charges. So, dito natin makikita kapag ang injury ni worker ay hindi lang temporary total disability. Kapag ito ay permanent partial disability or permanent total disability or fatality, then we have to refer to the scheduled charges para malaman natin kung ilang days ang i-charge natin for that disability. Okay, so we have here the table. Okay, papakita ko sa inyo yung table of charges natin. Okay, so ito yung table of charges natin for Table 6. Pursuant to the Occupational Safety and Health Standard, ito yung tabulation of scheduled charges natin. So A, for loss of member, either it could be traumatic or surgical yung pangyayari. So involving your fingers, their thumb, and the head. So pag nagkaroon ng amputation dito, pag nagkaroon ng amputation involving all parts of the bone, for your thumb, for your fingers, your index finger, your middle finger, your ring finger, and your little finger. So depende na po yun saan siya na-amputate, saan na po to. So pwede siya dito sa distal phalange. Okay, so distal phalange, middle phalange, proximal phalange, and the metacarpal. So dito natin makikita kung ilang days ang dapat natin i-charge. So kung yan yung mga injuries ni worker. So I have here a picture to show you what does distal phalange means. Hanggang saan ba naputol? Okay, so para makita nyo. Though your doctors know, your occupational health physician will tell you this, but of course, it's good to know. So I'm going to show you. Ito po yung natin. Pag nagkaroon ng amputation, for example, ito yung natin. This is your thumb. Okay, so on the color orange, ito dito, we call it the distal phalanges. So ito dito mga orange natin, these are all the distal phalanges. So pag naputol hanggang dito sa bone ng distal phalanges, so doon natin makikita yun sa schedule of charges kung ilang days ang i-charge natin. Kung ang naputol naman dito sa color blue natin, blue are called the middle phalanges or the intermediate phalanges. So yan, may specific charge din tayo dyan kung hanggang dyan naputol. And of course, your proximal phalanges, ito sa color green natin. So all color green are the proximal phalanges. And dito naman ito yung 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 natin sa baba. These are your metacarpal. So iba din yung charge natin pag metacarpal or umabot ang pagputol sa metacarpal ng kamay or ng fingers ng worker. So dito, yun makikita nyo, pag distal phalange, for example, hanggang sa distal phalange lang naputol, so involving all part of the bone of that particular portion of the finger or for the thumb, for example, kung sa thumb, you have to charge it 300 days lost. For your index finger, you have to charge it 100 days lost. So ito, irregardless kung ilang days siya na absent. Ang gagamitin natin days lost ay ito dito na sa scheduled charges natin. Okay, so dito natin i-base. So for your toe, your foot, and your ankle, So, amputation involving all part of the bone. Ito yung great toe natin, and each of other toes. So, pareho lang sila yung mga ibang mga toes natin. So, naiiba lang yung great toe natin. So, meron ding distal phalange, middle phalange, proximal phalange, and metacarpal yung foot natin. So, dito ipapakita ko rin sa inyo. Okay, so ito naman yung distal phalanges ng mga toes natin. Okay, so the color red are your distal phalanges, color blue is the middle phalanges, color green is your proximal phalanges. While ito naman dito sa taas, after the green, ito dito, these are your metatarsal. Okay, so may specific schedule of charges po tayo for that. So dito titignan natin, for example, distal phalange. Okay, so hanggang sa distal phalange na amputate ng grade 2, for example, 150 days ang i-charge natin. So ito yung lost day natin dito, 150. So dito nyo po makikita, i-refer nyo lang dito yung kung sakali nagkaroon tayo ng permanent total disability or permanent partial disability. So of course, kung ang naputol is your foot and the ankle, example, so 2,400 ang i-charge natin. Okay, so yung number of days lost natin will be 2,400. Again, reminder, okay, so kahit na sabihin natin for example, 60 days lang na absent si worker, we are not going to use the actual 60 days, but we have to use what is here on the schedule of charges natin. Okay? So for the arm naman, for example, any point above elbow, including joint, that's 4,500. Any point above the ankle or below the elbow, that's 3,600. So kung meron naman amputation sa legs, so any point above the knee, that's 4,500. Any point above the ankle or below the knee, that's 300. So for letter B, this is for impairment of function. Kung nagkaroon ng impairment, okay, of function of any body part of the worker, for example, one eye, so loss of sight, nagkaroon ng pagbubulag, nabulag si worker, yung isang mata ni worker. So whether or not there is sight in the other side, for example, irregardless kung bulag man yung isang mata niya or hindi, still we're going to charge is as 1,800. Okay? Then kung sakali naman ito ay both eyes, dalawang mata, okay, nawala ng paningin or loss of sight of both eyes in one accident, then we're going to charge it 6,000 days lost. Okay, so this is the same when we have a fatality, diba? Also 6,000 in charge. Now for 1 ear, complete loss of hearing. So sa isa lang, whether or not there is hearing in the other ear. So irregardless pa rin kung may pandinig yung isang ear niya or wala, basta kung may 1 ear nagkaroon ng loss of hearing, we're going to charge it as 600 days. Now, for both ears, kung dalawang hearing naman, loss of hearing for both ears in one accident, we're going to charge 3,000 days. Unrepaired hernia, okay, so meron din, that's 50. So, if one bone is not involved, used actual days lost. So, kung walang bone ang involved, used actual days lost. So, actual number of days na na-absent si worker ang gagamitin natin. And classify as temporary total disability. So, kung walang, for example, naputol na yung finger, portion of your finger, pero wala namang bone na naputol. So you will consider it as temporary total disability. So ang i-charge natin number of days ay yung number of days na na-absent si worker dulot ng pagkakaroon ng injury. The left of the distal bone of a finger or toe is considered bone. So if it shows in x-rays. For loss of use without amputation, ito yung pag-usapan naman natin kung walang amputation. So the term above when applied to the arm means toward the shoulder. So kung above, toward the shoulder. When applied to the leg means towards the hip. So yan. So Rule 1055.01, ito yung death resulting from accident shall be assigned a time charge of 6,000 days. So automatic po, pag may namatay na worker, so kada isang fatality or kada isang death, the charge will be 60 days, 6,000 days, I mean. Then for permanent total disability shall be assigned a time charge of 6,000 days also. Permanent total disability, for example, sabi natin kanina, loss of sight of both eyes, di ba? That's a permanent total disability. So shall be assigned a time charge of 6,000 days. Permanent partial disability, either traumatic or surgical, shall be assigned a time charge as provided on Table 6 of the Occupational Safety Net Standard. So yun na-discuss natin table kanina. For each finger or toe, use only charge for the highest valued bone involved, or computation for more than one finger or toe, total the separate charges for each finger or toe. Now, for loss of hearing is considered as permanent partial disability. Then for permanent impairment affecting more than one part of the body, the total charge shall be the sum of the scheduled charges for the individual body parts. So if the total exceeds 6,000 days, kung maraming portion ng body ng worker ang naputol or na-amputate, okay, so we have to add yung schedule of charges for the individual body parts. But the maximum that we can charge is only 6,000 days. Kahit na pag-add natin yung mga schedule of charges, if it's more than 6,000, then the maximum we can charge is only 6,000 days lost. Okay, so the charge for temporary total disability shall mean the total number of calendar days of disability. Now, for Rule 1055.03, that is the measurement of injury illness experience natin. So dito na po, magko-compute po tayo ng frequency rate and your severity rate, because this is also important. You need this information. You need to compute for this if you have accident, okay, disabling injury in the workplace that have occurred for a year. So you have to have your frequency rate, you have to compute your frequency and the severity rate. Kasi kailangan natin yung i-input yung data natin doon sa annual exposure data report natin. So disabling injury illness frequency rate, ito yung formula natin to compute for FR. Number of disabling injury, okay, or illness times 1 million divided by employee hours of exposure. So 1 million is actually a factor. It's a constant. Okay, so yan, constant ang gagamitin natin pag mag-compute tayo ng frequency rate. So the disabling injury illness frequency rate is based upon the total number of deaths. So lahat ng deaths, permanent total disability, permanent partial disability, and temporary total disabilities which occur during the covered period. So usually ang covered period natin is 1 year. Okay, so this relates to injuries or illness to the employee hours worked during period and expresses the number of such in a million man-hour. So always yung frequency rate natin is expressed per million man-hour. So let's proceed and try to solve some sample problem here for the frequency rate. So example, using the following data, calculate the frequency rate of accident in an industrial plant. So we have here, so sample data is the number of disabling injury, for example, excluding death. Ito yung sampling data natin, sample I mean. So you have 5 disabling injuries. Number of fatalities is 0. So walang namatay. Then, of course, number of workers, if you have 500 workers, for example, then average work hour per worker for the year. So for the year daw, every worker, okay, kada worker ay nagtrabaho sila ng 2,000 hours for the year. So we are going to compute for your frequency rate. Ito yung formula natin, the number of disabling injuries. So we have to count, okay, times 1 million divided by employee hours of exposure. So frequency rate is equal to 5 times 1 million. So saan natin nakuha yung 5? 5 is the number of disabling injuries. Okay. Then we have times 1 million man-hour. Ito yung factor natin which is constant. Okay. Then divided by the average or the employee hours of exposure, I mean. So dito, your employee, the total employee hours of exposure is the number of workers times the number of hours that they have worked for the period or for the year. Okay, so here we have to multiply since we have 500 workers. Meron tayong 500 workers and each of this worker ay nagtrabaho ng 2,000 hours for the year. So we have to multiply that. So that will be 5 million divided by 1 million, and that will give us a frequency rate of 5. Okay? So ito yung result natin. So let's have another example. Sample data naman, another sample data, we have number of disabling injury excluding death is meron tayong 5. Okay, so 5 disabling injury in this particular example. Then, number of fatalities, meron dalawang namatay na worker. Number of workers, we have 100 workers. Dito naman, the hours of exposure, binigyan lang tayo ng data that the worker or each worker is working 8 hours per day, 5 days per week, at 50 weeks a year. So yan, i-compute natin para makuha natin yung total number of employee hours of exposure. So to compute for the frequency rate, sabi, ito total natin yung number of disabling injuries. So disabling injuries at saka yung number of fatalities natin. So meron tayong 5 disabling injuries. So this is 5. Then you have to add, meron tayong 2 fatalities. Okay, so 5 plus 2, that will be 7, equal to 7. So times the constant 1 million. So dito sa baba, okay, dito makukuha natin ang total employee hours of exposure. So since we have 100 men or worker working 8 hours a day, so we have to multiply 100 times 8 times 5 days per week. Okay, so kasi they are working 5 days per week and they have worked 50 weeks for the year. So that will give us an answer of 7 million divided by 200,000. Okay, so 200,000 is your employee hours of exposure. So that will give us a frequency rate of 35. Okay, so madali lang mag-compute, di ba? Okay, so let's have last one example for the computation of frequency rate. So another sample data here is we have the number of disabling injury excluding death is 6. So walang nakalagay number of fatalities, meaning to say walang namatay. So number of medical treatment injury is 2. And number of workers, the same. Meron tayong 100 workers. Ang hours of exposure of each worker is 8 hours per day, 5 days per week, and 50 week in a year. So i-compute natin for the frequency rate. Ilan ba yung disabling injury natin? So bakit 6 lang ang nailagay natin dyan? Because the number of medical treatment is not considered as disabling injury. That is just a first aid case. So, or first aid injury. So, hindi po kasama sa computation natin ang mga medical treatment injury only. Yung mga injuries na the following day ay nakabalik si worker sa kanyang trabaho, sa established job niya, then that is not considered as disabling injury. So, kaya dito, ang ilalagay lang natin is number 6 because that is the total number of disabling injury. So 6 times 1 million, that is 6 million divided by 200. Ito yung employee hours of exposure natin, and that will give us a frequency rate of 30. Okay, so very easy in computing for the frequency rate. You just have to know kung ilan ba mayroon disabling injuries, ilan din na their death or fatality. Then we have to sum it up times 1 million divided by the total hours of exposure for the year. Okay, so employee hours of exposure. So let's proceed with severity rate naman. So disabling injury or illness severity rate, ito yung formula that we're going to use. It's equal to the total days lost times 1 million divided by the employee hours of exposure. So if you have noticed, okay, ito yung definition. The disabling injury or illness severity rate is based on the total of scheduled charges for all deaths. So kung mayroong namatay, so lahat nun, ika-count natin. Then permanent total disability. So lahat ng charges for the permanent total disability, lahat ng charges for the permanent partial disabilities, plus the total actual days of the disabilities of all temporary total disabilities, which occur during the period covered by the rate. So usually it's 1 year. So the rate relates these days to the total employee hours worked during the period and expresses the loss in terms of 1 million man-hour. So yung severity rate natin is actually expressed in the loss in terms of 1 million man-hour. So let's have some example. Okay, so one example, meron tayong sample data dito. Considering, for example, there was the number of disabling injury excluding death, there was 6. So nagkaroon tayo ng 6 disabling injuries. The number of days lost of each disabling injury. So ito daw, kada injury, kada yung disabling injury, 5 days po ang nagkaroon ng absent yung worker natin. So days lost is 5 per injury. So we also have the data here. The number of workers is still 100 workers and the same exposure, hours of exposure. So we have to compute for this, for your severity rate. Sabi sa formula, severity rate is the total days lost times 1 million divided by employee hours of exposure. So your severity rate is 6 times 5. So bakit natin na-multiply? 6 times 5 because 6 is the total number of disabling injuries. And according to our data, each disabling injury kay nagkaroon ng 5 days lost. Okay, so kada disabling injury, meaning to say, lahat ng 6 workers na nagkaroon ng injury ay nag-absent sila ng 5 days. So we have to multiply this, 6 times 5, to get the total number of days lost. So times 1 million divided by, again, that's 200,000 employee hours of exposure. So 30 million. Okay, so 30 million divided by 200,000 will give us a severity rate of 150. Okay, so remember, this is always expresses in terms of 1 million man-hours. Okay. So let's have another example, so another sample data here. So another sample, number of disabling injury is 1. So meron tayong 1 disabling injury. And the number of days lost for this disabling injury is 3 days. Okay, so nagkaroon ng na-absent si worker ng 3 days. Number of fatality is 1. So we have 1 fatality. So we're going to add, okay, para makuha natin yung total days lost, we're going to add the number of days lost due to disabling injury and the number of days lost or yung charge natin for the fatality. So let's proceed and compute for the severity rate. Okay, so severity rate will be the total, okay, number of days lost. So here we're going to multiply 1 disabling injury times 3 days. So nagkaroon kasi ng 3 days lost. So you have to multiply this, that will give you 3. Then you have to add, okay, yung number of days charged for 1 fatality. So 1 fatality times 6,000, since 6,000 days yung charge natin for every death. So i-add natin yan, 3 plus 6,000, that will give us 6,003 times 1 million. Okay, you have to divide by the employee hours of exposure. So we have the same employee hours of exposure. So your severity rate will be 6 billion, 3 million days divided by 200,000. That will give us a severity rate of 30,015. Okay, so 30,015 days lost for every million man-hour. So that is your severity rate. So we still have one. Okay, let's have another one. This is the last one, sample, that we are going to compute. So sample here is we have the data. So the data is we have the number of disabling injury, excluding fatality. Number one, meron daw loss of sight of both eyes. So nagkaroon ng pagbubulak si worker, that is total disability. Okay, permanent total disability, isa. Then we have number two, okay, amputation of leg above the knee. So nagkaroon ng amputation above the knee. So in this case, we're going to use your schedule of charges natin. So schedule of charges natin for kung ilan ba yung days i-charge natin for the loss of sight of both eyes, and ilang days na i-charge natin for the amputation of the leg above the knee. And of course, alam na naman natin the charge for fatality is 6,000. So let's go and check. Okay, tignan natin kung ano yung i-charge natin for the loss of sight for both eyes and amputation of leg above the knee. So here makikita natin, okay, so here you have the loss of sight, both eyes in one accident. So both eyes, 6,000 po yung charge natin. So 6,000 days lost ang i-charge natin. Then ang isa, sabi is nagkaroon ng amputation of the leg above the knee. Okay, so dito tayo, any point above the knee. So that will be a charge of 4,500. So remember, for both eyes in one accident, the scheduled charge is 6,000 days. And for the amputation of the leg, any point above the knee, that's 4,500. So let's go back with our computation. Okay, so here, alam na natin, loss of sight for both eyes, that is 6,000. And amputation of the leg, okay, 1, that's 4,500. And fatality is 6,000. So let's proceed and compute for the severity rate. So here we have 1 times 6,000. This is for the loss of sight for both eyes. So sabi natin, the loss of sight for both eyes, the charge is 6,000. Okay? So we have to add, ito naman, for the amputation of leg above the knee, the scheduled charge natin is 4,500 days. Plus 1 fatality. For 1 fatality, that is 1 times 6,000 days naman ang charge for fatality. So if you're going to add this, then you have to multiply this by 1 million. Still 1 million is constant. Okay. So divided by the employee hours of exposure. So we have the same employee hours of exposure. So let's compute for the severity rate for this. So that will give us actually 16,500,000,000 days. So you have to divide it by 200,000. That will give us an answer of 82,500 days lost for every million man-hours worked. Okay, so this is how you compute for your frequency rate and your severity rate. Hopefully, we were able to help you. We were able to explain you on how to compute for your frequency rate and severity rate, in which you can use it for your report, for your annual exposure data report. Should you have any question, feel free to email us to our official email address, or you may call us, or you may give comments on this particular video. Okay, so again, thank you so much. Hope you were able to learn something. Stay safe, everyone. Bye-bye.